It was just excitement. It was just like,
it felt like a Super Bowl party.
People were really excited about it. I don't remember a single movie as a kid that had that much behind it and that much build and that much kind of fever. And it was such a event for the summer of '89.
And where is the Batman?
It was the audiences that gave their massive approval, and it was a brilliant sell.
Every place that sold consumer goods had a Batman variation for basically every item you could possibly buy.
You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs.
It basically was a turning point. We were doing very well, but this sort of brought us to another plateau.
This thing was such an outsized hit. It really began a transformation of the studio mindset.
This business is a blockbuster franchise sequel business. If you look at what our industry is now, they make the great majority of the money from those kinds of films. They're the lifeblood of them.
that night, that summer, was the beginning of something that has yet to end.
The history of the tentpole movie really stems from the birth and feeding of Batman. Most of the blockbusters of the 70s and 80s were inadvertent.
If you go back, I mean, Jaws reinvented the way Hollywood viewed the summer. Summer wasn't a season of crazy money before Jaws, and it introduced a day and date movie. As that moved forward, you had these event movies. Some of them happened kind of by accident. The cinema-going experience changed.
I mean, George Lucas didn't set out to make a blockbuster in Star Wars. These were small pictures the directors wanted to make that became blockbusters. Now, this changed with the Batman era because Warner Brothers set out to make a blockbuster with Batman.
Batman was different. It wasn't so much about the story or the characters, it was about the event.
Batman was really the first major film of its era to become anticipated because everyone was excited about the property in which it was based off of. Of that generation, pretty much everybody knew who Batman was. That was a key element of what set Batman apart in the summer of '89. It was an original picture that, for all intents and purposes, played like a sequel. Yes, it was based on the comic book, based on the TV series, what have you, but it wasn't a sequel to something that had already proven popular. It wasn't Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, or Ghostbusters 2, or Return of the Jedi.
We worked on it for a decade, really. I mean, certainly all in the 80s. We had different writers, different directors attached to it. And remember, we were coming off a television series, which was sort of a comic television series. So the real question was, if we were going to do Batman, it had to be a different type of Batman.
Winged freak. Terrorizes. Wait till they get a load of me.
It was never the expectation when we started that project in 1978, and believe that it would have that impact. You don't start with that impact. You start with something that impacts you here in the heart, and if it does, in the gut, then you put you here, your wallet, and then you put your head to it. You get all those to fit together, and then you make Batman, and it could be a hit, or it could be a flop. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, it was super expensive and super risky. And Bob and Terry, you know, they ran a very successful studio. So this was a different kind of thing. This is what you did in those days. You know, you had to have a little bit more of a throw of the dice on people who were going to make the film, you know, the Tim Burton vision.
It was a really good decision that we made, because he was so playful in different movies that he had been making, and also he didn't take it so seriously that it wouldn't make people smile or laugh. So it was a combination of both. And Tim, as Bob said, Tim was by far the best director we could have had.
I want you to do me a favor. I want you to tell all your friends about me.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
When they announced that Michael Keaton was going to play Batman, I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a joke. I said, no, that's the other Tim Burton movie. that's Beetlejuice. You've made a mistake, because that's not, what? That's Batman?
I remember reading the script and him and thinking, well, you know, I know why I could do it, and I know what my take would be, but I'm sure that's not the movie they want to make. And then when I said to Tim, I said, well, you know, I'll tell you what I think. Thinking it'll be a nice conversation, we'll have some lunch, we'll go on with our lives. And I remember as I started to describe my take on the character, he was nodding and nodding. He just nodded and nodded and nodded. I go, oh, okay. Even then I thought, well, that's you and I. That's what we think about this.
To be honest with you, I remember when Mark Canton, who was the head of production, told us that Tim wanted to put Michael Keaton in as Batman. And my attitude was, over my dead body. But then we met with Tim, Terry and I. He said something that really won us over. And that was, the most important thing is his eyes. And when you think of Michael Keaton had like crazy eyes.
You're out there, you know, if this thing doesn't work, you look nuts, frankly. You're really looking stupid, and the whole thing kind of sinks, and that was really stepping out there. But artistically, you know, I'm fully committed, and I really don't care. I'm good with it.
Hold on.
It was a bold move by Burton to challenge the sensibilities of every fan.
People felt that the casting was a miss. You know, how could you possibly do this? How could you possibly do that? Whenever you have a property, an IP that's 50 years old and has gone through 3 or 4 generations of men and women and young people and older people, you always have everybody fashioning it in their own vision, their own experience. So you always run the risk. But a filmmaker like Tim had a vision for the picture. He had a holistic view of how the picture should be cast, shot, photographed, and unless you understood it, you would think everything is out of sync.
There was a ton of pressure on him for that, on all of us. We shot that on, classic Pinewood Studios, brutal hours and huge movie for its time, you know, huge undertaking in terms of sets. And when you look at it now and you think how films are made, I mean, the first Batman and the second one, to some degree, were kind of handmade, you know, a lot more practical, you know, stuff actually had to work, you know. You had to make them work, you had to adjust and, you know, as I say, work the suit.
It actually turned out to be, I think in the end, a very creative tension between, say, John Peters as the producer pushing for a Batman with edge, or Batman not wuss man, he said, and Tim Burton leaning towards brooding, weird, you know. The Tim Burton thing is not usually so commercial, but somehow when you brought those two together, despite the chaos, and there was considerable chaos, something came out of it that was a huge hit.
Get in the car.
Which one?
Look, all this stuff about Batmobiles and Batcaves and dressing in spandex. I mean, there was something weird about the character. And I thought it was very interesting as they were developing the marketing materials and the trailer. How peculiar, do you want to accentuate the weirdness? Because that was the catchy part, that was the sell. Or did you want to conventionalize it?
The trailer was a stroke of genius because, you know, always leave them wanting more. I mean, that is the definition of that trailer.
People lined up to see the trailer. They literally went in to see the trailer, then they left the movie. That's why the hype was so great.
Lieutenant, is there a 6-foot bat in Gotham City?
Nice outfit.
There's no words for what seeing that on screen, realized in that way, felt like.
In those days, you took what you could as a fan. We were just happy to see someone make the suit.
Any little morsel of information we got about Batman was like, you know, manna from heaven, and to see it actually moving, like, holy crap, like come on, did you look at that again?
It started out in a very clever way by being curious rather than being a bombardment. And so there was an act of discovery on the part of the audience.
If you ask somebody, what's the story this summer? Nobody had to think twice. I mean, the bat signal was in the sky, you know, the whole summer long.
From day one, we built it before we started to shoot with the toys, making the deal. The idea was to sell everything about Batman.
Among the things I think that the producer, John Peters, had really pushed for, as I understand it, was just a very simple logo, the Batman logo. And he wanted materials that had no words, nothing else, just this logo to appear, which was something that would not normally be the approach the studio would have taken at that point, but they did do it. And it started a buzz on this a completely different kind of Batman.
And it was nothing but just a Batman symbol. You know, and it was like June, Keaton, Nicholson, and then a big symbol. And that's all they sold it on. Like, that's all you, to a certain degree, all you needed.
And what really happened is that first poster went up with no name, looked like somebody's mouth that was open, with a glottis hanging down. People kept saying, what is that? It asked more questions than it answered. And then when you finally explained it, it was like, everyone could play guessing game. What do you think that is? What do you think that is? Well, that's Batman.
When people saw the ads and the logos, it sort of, everyone woke up, and everyone for the first time was starting to talk all about it. People were talking about it all over the place and all over the world, frankly.
Nowadays, you're trying to hold back information on films. Back then, there was no outlet really for people to find that kind of stuff easily.
While it was also expensive, the type of marketing that was put on it was not a hope and an expectation, but an absolute commitment to its success.
Get those wonderful toys.
Obviously, you have the merchandising bonanza, again referred to as Batmania for short, where you had a 6-month deluge of merchandising and saturation level marketing, which was somewhat, arguably unprecedented at that time, especially for a non-sequel.
I mean, I remember that people were getting the Batman symbol carved into their heads. You know, like, I want to go to the barbershop. Do me a favor, can you just carve like a Batman here and like a Batman here?
There was a period where the bat symbol tattoo was probably the most popular tattoo that was being done around the world.
I like that everyone was talking about Batman and the Joker because I love those characters, and so it was maybe the first time that the mainstream was loving comic books in a way that they hadn't before. No one wore Batman t-shirts back then. You see them everywhere now, but when that movie came out, it kind of made it okay to love Batman and to wear a Batman t-shirt. Like, I could wear a Joker t-shirt, and it was cool.
You had Prince doing a bat dance. I felt like I was losing my mind. And it was fun. It was the movie that mattered, you know? Everybody had an opinion about it.
That was kind of the amazing part of it, was the beginning of the sort of the big fandom. Like, I think that Batman was the first big tent fan thing where everybody was sort of welcome, and you would never get that before. You would never get normies coming into your comic book store looking for stuff. But Batman brought them in.
John Peters, on the selling of the movie, did a great job. He violated every rule on a preview. You know, when you preview a movie, you're not supposed to tell somebody too much about it, you know. Of course, he had it so hyped that when we went into the theater that night to run it, the audience was so high and so excited, and the buzz from that screening was so significant that it just got around. And this is before the internet was a big thing. You're talking about just word of mouth traveled everywhere about this unbelievable movie called Batman.
Everybody was trying everything to have a piece of the pie. That's the good news and the scary news, because it got its own momentum, but that's leading with your chin, and you got to be careful. The audience in this film had to find the film. They had to own the film if it was going to work.
And I remember that weekend like it was yesterday. I mean, we couldn't believe the grosses. I mean, they were so staggering. I mean, we were on the phone all weekend. I mean, because it was the highest grossing movie ever for a weekend. And we did over $42 million, and it was unbelievable. We knew it was going to be big. We thought it would be the biggest, but not over 40. Nobody predicted that number.
So we were right. We were just being conservative.
The next day, after the film did all that business on that Sunday, in every studio in town, here's what the head of the studio said. Bring me one of those. Just like it.
The core lesson of Batman's box office success was how big it was and how quickly it made that money. It wasn't a long-run blockbuster like Ghostbusters or Back to the Future that played for a year. it was, comparatively speaking, in and out of theaters in a flash. That was great for Warner Brothers because, money is money. Who cares how you make it? But the lesson that you learned within 5-6 years over time was that with the right marketing campaign, you could open so high that it didn't matter if your movie was any good. Because yeah, you'd take a huge opening weekend drop in the second weekend, but you'd be out of theaters in 6 weekends, you'd already be a big hit.
I never thought of a picture doing $65 or $70 million for the first week. It was never even my comprehension. I don't think anybody else was.
But at the end of the day, that film would not have opened to $40 million, and I do not believe it would have crossed $250 domestic without the marketing campaign, without the Batmania merchandising frenzy that surrounded it, which also gave it tons and tons and tons of free publicity from the media when talking about the merchandising campaign, when talking about the movie itself, when talking about how angry everybody allegedly was over casting Michael Keaton as Batman.
I'm gonna kill you. You idiot! You made me, remember?
And the center held. It was such a big film, but it lived up to the moment. It lived up to the hype. Did it live up critically? That depends on who you ask.
I thought that the art direction was sensational. I thought the special effects were good. I thought those buildings looked like they went up 1.5 miles into the sky. I thought the dark film noir look of the film was very nice, but I didn't care about anything that happened in the movie. I never really found that these characters became people that I could get involved with.
I thought that the Bruce Wayne character was a fascinating guy. Rather than playing this as a strong man, I thought it was interesting to show this guy as sort of conflicted and nervous about it, and that's why he goes into this big pose.
Well, that's a modern touch that I wasn't surprised about.
I thought going for the dark look was dangerous, but in the long run, smart. He made a picture that was much more interesting and had many different levels.
I remember when I saw the movie, I did think it was a bit of a mess. And I was a little bit surprised that the public truly didn't care.
It almost didn't matter what movie we got, as long as it was a movie. Is it 2 hours of Batman? Yes, it's 2 hours of Batman. What is it? I don't care. It's 2 hours of Batman.
Come on, you gruesome son of a... Come to me.
There are movies that become events. They're eventized. They become the movie that you must see, the movie that you see again and again. There's something that, that the fans related to, but, specifically people who are fans of that kind of stuff, but then it goes beyond. It becomes like wildfire. That's the studio's dream, and it came true with Batman.
But if you want to see the genesis point, or at least the pivot point, that led us to the modern-day blockbuster, summer 1989, Batman. That's the movie that defined what this new genre was going to be, and it showed both in its plastic and its publicity, in its press and its prominence, that this was mega-sized. This is going to take everybody on all the corporate platforms can all chip in, and we can make this thing bigger than a movie. And it wasn't a movie at that point. It was a happening. It was a movement.
It changed Warner Brothers forever. I mean, it basically changed it forever because we had hit movies, but this was a huge franchise. And as it turned out, look how many movies have been made on Batman, It's staggering. And it continues to go on.
I think Warner Brothers at the time had an inkling that in the right hands the film could be big, but I don't think they were even remotely prepared for the success. I mean, it really was, in terms of big comic book movies and launching a franchise, it was huge, and it showed mainstream audiences that the character could be taken seriously, but it also showed people like Warner Brothers that this was the kind of crown jewel in terms of their IP, and because of that, Batman's going to be around for a long, long time.
I mean, obviously, when somebody has a success like Batman, everybody is jealous, and everybody wants to figure out how they can do something in the same wheelhouse and try to make it work.
There was always the search for certainty, and they were going to find out the secret of the franchise. They actually knew it. They saw it in James Bond years before, but they didn't really quite play it the same way. But suddenly, when they saw those enormous values, that's what they looked for.
Hollywood realized, wow, we can do a shortcut in marketing by taking something that already has brand name awareness. People already know these characters. We're taking these characters, putting movie stars in them, and